Hello, hello, yes, it's working, hello. Hi everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for coming along and attending this presentation. I'm extremely grateful to you all because, well, the truth of the matter is that without you guys, the supporters of Commodore and Amiga over the years, I wouldn't even be here now. So, let's give a round of applause to you guys. Come on. Thank you so very much. I mean, let's be honest about it. It's absolutely astounding. If somebody had said to me in 1994, David, in 30 years' time, you're going to be on a stage talking to people that are fans of Commodore and Amiga, I'd have said, what drugs are you on? Can I have some, please? Because it's unbelievable. But in reality, of course, we have a massive following. And just to put that in perspective, I'm certain that some of you have seen a few months ago, they released the 64 Mini. Did you see that? Have a guess how many they've sold. Have a guess. They've sold over 250,000 of them. That's incredible. All these years later, it's absolutely incredible. But I guess one of the truths of the matter is that Commodore sold the best-selling computer of all time in the Commodore 64, and there is much conjecture about how many Commodore actually sold. Well, I know the true number. The true number is just under 27 million worldwide. And the reason I know the number is because there was a time when I and my co-MD at Commodore UK, we were trying to buy the assets of Commodore, so we had to do what they call due diligence, which is checking on what we were actually going to be buying. So we had the chance to have a look at all the books, and the number was just under 27 million, which is absolutely amazing when you think about it. But it's amazing to think that all those years later, there is still a massive fan base, people who absolutely adore the product. And I think, to be truthful, one of the reasons is that when Commodore launched the 64, and then a few years later they launched the Amiga, we actually had the right product at the right time for a generation that were looking for something new. And many people that were youngsters at the time, when they started with the 64, progressed to an Amiga, many of those people are now in high-powered, high-position jobs all around the world, which they put down to the fact that they started to code with 64 and or Amiga. And it's amazing. I mean, let me tell you this. I was talking with a guy the other day who was a Commodore. He actually wrote some of the code for Amiga. He is now head of software at Mozilla. It just gives you an example of the kind of things that can happen from people that were previously involved with Commodore. R.J. Michael, who was, again, involved with the Amiga, he's now involved with Google and been with Google several years, and in great jobs. So obviously we were the right product at the right time. But I find it absolutely amazing, to be honest with you, that it is such a powerful, yes, it's retro, but it's more than that. There is no following, for example, for Amstrad, for Sinclair. There's no similar following. They've got their own followers, but they're very tiny numbers compared to Commodore and Amiga. It's just quite staggering. Anyway, I'm here today to do questions and answers, and also, to be candid, I'm here to sell my book. And this book, which was funded by a Kickstarter, and I thank all of those who funded the book. This was released, first released in October, and I sold out of the first run of books, which was 1,750 books. So this is the second run, and it is selling very well. And what this book is about, this is telling the story of how a once billion-dollar company went bankrupt. It's really unbelievable to think that a company could go bankrupt that had such a big turnover. But the truth of the matter is that it was so badly mismanaged by senior executives at Commodore. And because I was at Commodore for 12 and a half years, I worked for Commodore initially in the UK. Then I went to Switzerland to Commodore Electronics Limited, which was the holding company for the whole group of Commodore. And while I was there, I was looking after 35 countries. Then I went to America as vice president of Commodore Inc., the sales company in America, and then back to the UK as managing director. And the reason I'm telling you all of that is because in this book, I give you an overview of many decisions that were made badly, many opportunities that were missed and passed by. But it's not just my recollections. We've also got chapters in here from several people. Dave Haney, one of the great engineers. R.J. Muckle's written a chapter. Beth Richards, she was the lead engineer on the CD 1200 project, which never got launched because Commodore went bankrupt prior to that supposed launch. And so you got viewpoints from many Commodore people from around the world, their points. So this is a story about the truth from the inside of Commodore. And I think you'll find it good reading. Most people seem to enjoy it, for which I'm very, very grateful. I also have a Blu-ray, which is this baby here. And this has some interviews which relate stories that are not in the book. But also, more importantly, I think, when I joined Commodore, which was in June of 1983, it was only a matter of 4 or 5 months later that Jack Tramiel, who was the founder of Commodore, he left Commodore. So I didn't have much interaction with him. In fact, I met him once for about 2 minutes, and that was it. So my book does not cover Jack Tramiel because he wasn't in the company when I was there. But so what we've got on the Blu-ray, we've got a 40-minute documentary, which is all about Jack Tramiel, about how he started, because of course, he was an inmate at Auschwitz, and he got rescued by the American Army, military. So he went to America and joined the American military as a means of saying thank you for rescuing me. And then he went to Canada and he started his business, and the rest is history. But it's a very interesting documentary that tells you the whole story. Anyway, both of these are available, the book and the Blu-ray available for sale. We're just as you walk towards the exit on the left-hand side. Please come and say hello, and I'll be very happy to sign books for you or anything else. If you've got any Commodore Amiga memento that you'd like signed, happy to do so. Okay, so it's supposed to be question and answer, but who's going to be doing that?
I have no idea where are those guys, you know? So I have a question for you. I mean, 2 questions before maybe audience will have some questions. What's your favorite model of Commodore and why?
I have to say it's the Amiga 500. And the reason it's my favorite is because it was with that product that I was able to really launch massive sales of Amiga, and how that came about is an interesting story. It's actually a story in the book, of course. What happened was that I had a new managing director came into Commodore UK, and he was from the business systems background. He used to sell PCs and stuff like that. So when he came into Commodore UK, the first thing he did was to fire all of the PC business guys, and he brought all his own people in, which is fair enough. And he did not speak to me for 2 weeks, not a one word, I swear to you. And then one day he came in and he said, "Pleasance, my office now." So I sat down. He said, "Look," he said, "David," he said, "I've got to tell you this." He said, "If I knew anybody who understood your side of the business," we were consumer products. He said, "If I knew anybody, you wouldn't be here today. I'd have brought them in." And I said, "Oh, thanks a lot. That's wonderful." You know. He said, "No," he said, "I don't know anything about you," he said, "but I've been told to change the whole ethos of Commodore UK." He said, "So you'll see, and I've brought in all of my own people." He said, "So I guess I'm stuck with you." So he said, "On that basis, here are all my rules." And he spent 20 minutes telling me all about ethics and honesty and integrity and everything which I've believed in all my whole life. So I let him finish. And then he said, so that's it. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, Steve, I'll make a deal with you. He said, you're in no position to make a deal with me. I said, no, hear me out. I said, you're a new managing director. If you let me do what I've been trying to do for a long time, I will either bring you more business than you've ever seen in your life before, or you'll have reason to get rid of me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, look, Steve. And I pointed to his desk and I said, what's that sitting over there? And it was Amiga 500. He said, it's a computer. And I said, no, it's not. I said, it's a piece of plastic with some keys on it. I said, how can you market a piece of plastic with some keys on it? That's not the way to sell products. We have to sell what it will do for you. So I said, if you let me do what I want to do, from now on, we will not sell computers, we sell dreams. He said, what do you mean? And I said, what I want to do is I want to put a package together that has the latest game software possible, the best thing we can put together. Inside the pack, we must have some productivity software. There must be word processing, art packages and stuff like that. And the reason we must do that is because we have to justify to the parents who are spending the money why they buy this product. Because we all know the kids want the games, but you have to justify the expenditure. So anyway, he gave me the go-ahead to do it. I sat down with my team, a really good team of guys and girls, and we talked about what's going to be the next big game. And everybody agreed it was likely to be Batman, because Batman the movie was being released. And Ocean Software had just come back from the States, from Hollywood. They'd just paid $1 million for the license to write the game. $1 million. So I said, listen, I'm going to come and put a proposition to you that you will either have the balls to do and go with, or you'll send for the men in the white coats to come and take me away for crazy. So he said, what do you want to do? I said, all right, here's what I want to do. I said, when the game is finished, I want you to give it to me for 2 months exclusively in the pack. So the dealers can't buy it on its own. If anybody wants to get Batman, they've got to get it in the pack. I said, I want to pay you very little for it, and I only want to commit to 10,000 pieces. So the first thing they said was, send for the men in the white coats, because they thought I was completely crazy. And so they said, okay, David, we've got some concerns. They said, we think our dealers are going to be very angry. And I said, they will be. But my guess is, if this goes as well as I think it will go, they'll be angry for about 48 hours. Because if this goes well, they will be selling a £400 product as opposed to a £40 product. And I know as retailers what I'd prefer to sell. Okay, they said. They said, David, we've just spent $1 million, and it's going to cost us $1 million to make the game. We've done a calculation that says how many we must sell to make a profit. And we're afraid that this activity is going to influence that number, affect that number. And I said, well, look, my advertising budget is considerably greater than yours, but my advertising budget is going to be promoting Batman. It's not promoting Amiga. The fact that there is Amiga inside the box is incidental. So I said, I think, collectively, we'll have a very, very hot property. Anyway, the net result was that, yes, they're dealers. Exactly as I predicted, the dealers were pissed off for about 48 hours. And then they started to sell Batman packs in volume. They actually sold 5 times more than the best estimates they'd ever made for that game. And I didn't take 10,000 pieces from them. I ended up taking 186,000 pieces, because that's how many Amiga 500s we sold in 12 weeks in the Batman pack. So that's why I love Amiga 500.
Was this your favorite bundle?
Pardon?
Was this your favorite bundle with Amiga? Was it the only one, or?
Oh no, we did after the Batman pack. The difficulty was, how do you better it? Because every time we wanted to do
was
something...
it the best-selling bundle, actually?
It was the second bundle came very close to that. But the point I'm trying to make is that we changed the way that you market things. Because if you remember, not long after that, Sega and Nintendo, they all did bundles, the same sort of thing as we did. But we were the pioneers of all of that. And yeah, I mean, we did several bundles. But one of the problems is that finding great software that has the same effect. I mean, not everything we put together worked, but most of it did.
And so what was your favorite game of that time?
You guys are going to find this incredible. I never played games.
That was my first question that I didn't ask, actually.
Yeah, I've never played games. And let me tell you something else, right? And in a way, I think I can justify what I'm saying because I think being a marketeer, which is basically what I am, and I think I'm a very good salesman. But the thing is this, is that I think it's easy to market something if you don't know the technicalities of it. I say to somebody, here's a product and this is the benefits it will bring you. This is what it will do for you. And if somebody says to me, well, how does it do it? I say, don't ask me, but I'll bring you a man who can tell you how it does it. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I did a back of the envelope calculation on how many computers I've sold personally, not my team, me personally. And I think I sold with VIC-20s and 64s and Amigas and Plus 4s and everything else, about 2.2 million computers. That's me. And I never switched one on. Sorry, but that's the truth.
Myślę, że brawa się należą takie srogie.
This is my colleague, Dan Wood. Dan is famous for him and Ravi have got this incredible podcast called The Retro Hour. And it's always in the top 5 of the podcasts in the UK. And Dan actually works with me at Friend. I don't know if you were here earlier on when Hogne gave a presentation about Friend, who I work with now. But Dan actually is our media manager for Europe, a Friend, and he's got an incredible network of everybody in social media, and so on and so forth. And his plane was late landing. I don't think it was. I think he's just late getting here. But anyway, he and I are supposed to be doing this jointly. So are we ready?
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. That was pretty rock and roll straight off the plane into the event. So welcome to Pixel Heaven. I'm Dan Wood. I host a podcast called the Retro Hour podcast. And our show comes out every Friday, available from all your favourite podcast places. And one of our all-time favourite guests that we ever had on the show, and a very dear friend of mine, is a man who ran one of the most popular computer companies back in the day. Just let's get a little show of hands. Anyone have a Commodore 64 back in the day? Oh, they're in. A VIC-20? Amiga? Oh, yeah. Well, please give a warm welcome to the man who was the managing director of Commodore UK, had a 12-year career with the company, and recently has written a book all about his time at Commodore. Please welcome David Pleasance.
Thanks, guys.
Now, your book, Commodore, The Inside Story, the first book that's been written from the inside perspective from people who worked at the company itself. What was the process like of doing the book?
Well, to be honest with you, I had no intention of writing a book, but people like Dan and other people kept insisting, look, you've got great stories to tell, why don't you write it? And I've never considered myself to be any kind of English expert, although of course English is my native language. And when I started to actually really draft out what I was going to write about, and so I came up with some topics, and then I filled in the topics and so on and so forth. And to be honest with you, there were so many little things that I couldn't remember, and then I'd wake up in the middle of the night and remember something, and if I didn't get up immediately and put it down, in the morning I'd forgotten about it again. So it was quite a challenging endeavor, and it took me quite a lot longer than I actually thought it would take. But it also brought back some incredible memories, and even though I've got to be honest with you, even though the mismanagement of the company was horrific, I don't believe if we had hired a team of professional saboteurs that it could have been any better. I wouldn't have changed very much, because I remember I could not wait to get to work every day. I just wanted to get to work. It was emotionally incredible, because we were pioneering a cottage industry. It was very cutthroat, but the best thing about it was, even though, you know, we had big competition. We had competition from Sega and Nintendo and Sinclair and Alan Sugar with Amstrad and stuff like that. We all knew each other, and I mean that quite intimately. We were all quite friends. We'd be competitors in the daytime and be drinking beers together at night in the bar. And it's not like that now, of course. Today it's all about the suits and the money and the greed. But in those days it was fantastic. And but what just to get back to your question, when I'd finished writing as much as I could remember, and I read through my book, I was very unhappy, because I thought it was more a story about David Pleasance than it was about Commodore. And in a way, I guess that's probably natural, because everything I was writing about was through my ears and my eyes. But I was not satisfied, so therefore I decided I'd reach out to other people within Commodore who had also had some opinion, something to say. And I said to all of them, I said, please write, and I want you to write whatever you feel like. If you want to call one of the executives an arsehole, you call him an arsehole. I'm not going to edit whatever you write. I want it to be the truth. And that's what happened. And so, having had chapters from very good people within Commodore, it's now filled out the book to the point where it ended up costing me money because I'd estimated how many pages the book would be and how much it would weigh and what the postage would be. And it came in way bigger book. It's now 368 pages. It's 90,000 words. And Dan knows that, because I paid Dan, actually, I scammed him. I paid him very little money to do the audio book. So he's actually...
Never again.
So he knows there's 90,000 words, right? But anyway, so that, in answer to your question, yeah, it was very rewarding. And for me, I guess what it is, it's for me, it's leaving a legacy. That's really what I'm proud of.
And in the book as well, I mean, you talk about these people who contributed to the book, and the stories in there from RJ Michael. I mean, my mum, like, you know, she really knew nothing about Commodore or the Amiga. She wanted to hear a bit of the audiobook, so I played her RJ's chapter, and she had a tear in her eye at the end of it. And I think that's one thing for me that makes the book really powerful. It's stories from the people, isn't it? And did you kind of rekindle any maybe friendships that people you hadn't spoke to for a long time? Have you got back in touch with some old friends from Commodore through it?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it's quite staggering that I'm getting emails, and I'm getting loads and loads of friend requests on Facebook from people that I'd forgotten all about. One guy got in touch with me. He currently lives in Georgia, yeah. And he asked me to lend him some money, and he's never paid me back. I just thought I'd mention that. It just came to mind. Yeah, lots of people have got in touch, people that I used to work with at Commodore. And the thing is, the best thing about it was that some of them were Commodore UK, some of them were Commodore Electronics in Switzerland, and in fact, some of my customers, because when I was at Commodore Electronics, I looked after 35 countries. So I got people, for example, one of my distributors, a guy who was based in Finland, I got him to write only just like a quote, what it was like working with us, and I said there was no restrictions. If they thought we were terrible, that's what they've written, and that's what's in the book. So yes, in answer to your question, lots of memories and lots of people got back in touch.
I love your story about, you know, when you joined Commodore originally, you were selling pets, weren't you, to like business division you were working in. What did you think when you first saw the Commodore 64 and were able to market and sell that? Did you know that was going to be a game changer?
Well, you see, the truth of the matter is, first of all, me getting a job with Commodore was an absolute and complete fluke. I did not apply for a job with Commodore. It wasn't advertised. I applied for it. I'd just come back from Australia, And on my way back, I took 7 weeks traveling the world to determine what I wanted to get into next. I'd actually been with Pioneer Electronics in Australia, selling electronics, stereos and stuff. So I spent 7 weeks traveling, and it was obvious to me that the next burgeoning thing was going to be home computers. So I came back to the UK, and in 1983, we had no internet. And any jobs that were advertised were in the newspapers, usually on a Thursday and on a Sunday. So I'm scouring the newspapers for anything to do with computers, even though I knew nothing about computers. Anyway, there was a job advertised through an agency in London. And I remember getting on the phone, and I spent about 40 minutes persuading this guy to let me actually have an interview. So as I arrived, I'll never forget, as I arrived, there was a lady just leaving, and I remember holding the door open for this lady as she left. Went in, went straight to this guy, sat down, and had my interview. And after the interview, after about 35 minutes, he said, "Mr. Pleasance," he said, "there's no doubt in my mind, this job that you've come for, you could do it standing on your head, but I'm not going to put you forward for it." I said, "Oh, thanks a lot." He said, No, hear me out." He said, "I've just looked at your CV. He said, you have got the best retail background I've ever seen, because everything I'd ever did in my career was retail orientated, and I only ever worked for blue chip companies." And he said, "As a recruitment agent," he said, "it would be remiss of me to not try to utilize your skills." And he said, so I got up to leave. He said, "Sit down." He said, "Did you see a lady leaving as you arrived?" I said, "Yeah, I did. I held the door open for her." He said, "Well," he said, "she's just been here, and she's given me a brief for a job that I think you'd be absolutely perfect for." He said, "I've not even had the time to write it up because she gave me information and left." And he said, "She's with a computer company." He didn't say who it was. He said, "She's with a computer company, and they want to sell their business computers into the retail market. And they do not know, should they get a computer specialist who knows nothing about retail, or a retail specialist who knows nothing about computers." And I told her, "You need to get a retail specialist, because you can learn about the products, but the market is a whole different thing." He said, "David, you'd be perfect for this job." And that was with Commodore. And what they wanted to do, 3 days later, I'm being interviewed in Brown's Hotel of London by this same lady. And they said, "David, what we're doing is that we've got this product called the Commodore PET." Remember, this is before PCs were launched as they were. And she said, "We want to sell PETs into the retail market. And, we basically, you got a blank sheet of paper to do what you want." So I said, "Fine, thank you." And I was given the job, which is amazing. So anyway, I've been in Australia for several years, and I was not completely in touch with who the retailers in the UK were. Dixons and Comet and Currys and all of these people. So I spent 3 or 4 weeks going around and examining all these stores to find out who would be the very first one to do this deal with. And there was a company around in those days called Lasky's. Lasky's had 54 stores, but unlike the other stores, they didn't sell white goods. They didn't sell fridges and freezers and washing machines. They sold stereos and televisions, but they also, in 26 of their 54 shops, they had a store within a store called Micropoint, and they were selling business products. So that was a natural for me to launch with. So the first thing I did is I went to their head office. I had a meeting with their managing director, and I got a letter in writing giving me permission to interview all of the Micropoint store managers in all 26 shops. So anyway, I started doing that, and I was in shop number 24. I'd done 23. I was in shop number 24. Remember, we didn't have mobile phones in those days, and this Eileen who'd recruited me, she rang me. Luckily, I was in the store I was supposed to be, and she said, "Do you remember when I interviewed you? I told you how things really change rapidly in Commodore. It's a very exciting company." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, your number has just come up." She said, "As you know, we launched the 64 a few months ago." And she said, "It's going crazy, and we need somebody to look after all the major retail accounts, and you're it." So the reason I'm telling you all this is because I knew then. Oh, by the way, she said, the other reason is that Commodore internationally have just told us that they don't have enough pets in order to start opening a new market. I didn't have anything to sell into the retail market, but that was what I was specifically recruited to do. And so I knew then, from that moment in time, that Commodore never, ever had a business plan. And they never did, of any kind.
Well, the 64 was obviously a phenomenal product. I mean, it held the title of the best-selling single-model home computer of all time for decades. But there was another system that I know actually personally worked out well for you, but maybe not so much for Commodore, and that was the Commodore Plus 4. Anyone remember the Plus 4? Yeah, I had one of those as well back in the day. That was an interesting story from your book.
Yeah, well, this is another example of Commodore never having a business plan. They never used to do any market research. You would think that they would go to their biggest subsidiaries who are doing well and say, tell us what you need. What product do you need? What will the market buy? How much should it be? Can we build it? And all that kind of stuff. Never. But what they did do is that they would make something and then send it to you. And I remember getting, I think the first shipment I got was 35,000 plus 4s. And, honestly, a plus 4 at that moment in time was as much use as a chocolate teapot. Absolutely useless product. Anyway, we tried everything to sell it, and it was just a dead loss. And then in the end, we had quite a lot of them sitting in store. And again, I had a new managing director come in. This is before the Amiga, of course. A new MD came in called Nick Bessie, a really good guy. And he came up to me and he said, David, he said, what can we do to get rid of all of these plus 4s? And he said, we need to incentivize the staff. And I said, incentivizing the staff, just with money ain't going to work, because we've all tried to sell it and it's a lemon. Nobody wants to buy it. So then he said, well, maybe we can do some other kind of incentive. And I said, what do you have in mind? And he said, how about incentivize the staff in a way that will benefit their partners as well? Maybe some champagne. Maybe if I give you bottles of champagne for a number that you sell. Anyway, cut a long story short, I immediately went out, and I'd got a good relationship with Lasky's, even though I hadn't sold pets into them. And I think we had 10,000 to sell. And I sold the whole 10,000 to Lasky's in one go, like that. Mind you, it was a £99 retail product with 10 games. So I've sold a lot. A couple of the guys took some orders. I ended up with 144 bottles of champagne. It's true. But I gave some of the champagne to the other guys who'd taken orders.
But that was a good weekend.
Well, yeah, more than a weekend. But then the interesting story comes as follows, and you'll love this story. It was around about September when I did this deal, and a week or two later, a guy comes into my office, and he said, David, he said, he was a Cockney with a really terrible Cockney accent, and as God is my witness, he sat down, he put his foot up on my desk and was picking his nose. I promise you, right? He said, David, he said, I've got 20 million quid, and I want to buy all your Commodore 64s. The whole lot, corner of the market. And I said, no can do. We'd got orders for everything coming up for the Christmas season, scheduled orders and everything else, and the market was beautiful. And anyway, in the end, he said, I can't believe I can't spend 20 effing million quid with you. Surely you must have something. And I said, I said, have you heard of the Plus 4? No. So anyway, the bottom line is that I sold him, and I had to go back to Lasky's and renege on the deal, which was okay. But I didn't just. We sold him all of the and a few more plus 4s, and in this pack at 99 quid. And anyway, so they took delivery of them, and they were flying out the door in October and November, ready for Christmas. So because they were flying out, I mean big numbers. So they come back to me, can you get any more? So we got the world's inventory of plus 4s in component form, and we assembled them and made them all, because in Commodore Corby we had an assembly plant. So we got all the world's plus 4s, But on top of that, we sold them all the peripherals that went with the Plus 4, the 1542 drives and the monitors, all the dark grey colour. We sold them the lot. We come out of that office and we were doing cartwheels in the car park, I'm telling you, right? Anyway, everything was fantastic until Christmas. And the Christmas Day comes and the kids get their Plus 4, and of course they got 10 games. So for the first week, everything is fine. And then they all go out and start to buy more games. And then was the only time that they found out that the Plus 4 was not 64 compatible. The thing is, they never asked me. So, go on.
Well, let's talk about the Amiga. That was a computer that changed the industry. Do you remember when you first saw the Amiga?
Yeah, the first time I saw the Amiga was we were at a PC show in, I think it was Earl's Court, a big PC show where everybody was there, and we had the Amiga 1000, and we had a massive screen, which at the time was as big as you could get, and we were showing 32 programs running simultaneously, obviously in very small windows, and some of them running very slowly, because that's all it could do. But we were showing 32 programs running simultaneously, and everybody just went, It was mind-blowing. And of course the colors and everything else. So yeah, I remember it very, very well.
When the Amiga 500 came along, that was when the Amiga really became a popular home computer. And I know you had an interesting approach of getting it into homes, because obviously all the kids wanted to play games.
Everybody talked about that
Have
just
you?
before you came on. Yeah.
Well, with the Batman pack
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the Cartoon Classics pack as well.
Yeah.
I mean, was that something that was ever planned to be replicated around the world, or?
No, the stupidity of it is that we had massive success. And I went to Mehdi Ali, who was the president of the company at the time, and I said, Mehdi, look at the success we've got. We are selling massive volumes, and our target audience is exactly the same in England as it is in France, as it is in Germany, as it is in Italy, and all around the world. I said, we must be replicating this, make sure all the subsidiaries follow it. I said, in fact, we can save ourselves a fortune in advertising. I said, for example, Commodore gave every subsidiary a percentage of its turnover for their marketing. In the UK, we had a 5% of our turnover as a marketing figure. We were doing £100 million, so we got £5 million of advertising. But I said, if we combine that, I said, let's say, for example, I pulled together another pack, whatever the next pack is going to be. When we get the artwork for the package designed, we get it all designed in multiple languages. We then send the artwork to each country so they get it printed in their own country. And if I go to Ocean and say, I'm not saying I want 10,000 pieces, I'm going to say I want 100,000 pieces because we're spreading it through Europe. The economy of scale, we could do a television advert and at the same time we get it dubbed in all the different languages. It would save Commodore a fortune. And they wouldn't do it. They just, so one day I can promise you I got a phone call from Mehdi Ali and he said, Pleasance, I've listened to you, he said, I've just appointed a head of international marketing, and he's recruited a business guy, and he's recruited a consumer guy, and they're going to be doing what your idea is. Now, the first thing that happened is that this guy, I think his name was Peter, but that's all I can remember. The first thing is that he doesn't move into our offices. He takes his own offices in central London, which cost a fortune. He then ordered himself a bespoke-made office furniture, which cost £170,000 for a desk and a cupboard and a couple of chairs. I don't know. And then I never heard any more from him. But then the guy who was his consumer guy, and I don't even remember his name, I swear to you, he rang me up and he said, David, he said, I understand that you're the guy that has the consumer knowledge. And I said, well, I think so, yeah. He said, can I come and pick your brain? I said, absolutely, please do. And this guy came, and as God is my witness, he sat across my desk for 14 minutes. He asked me 6 questions and said, that's all I need to know, and left. I never saw him again. That's Commodore International Marketing for you.
Well, you mentioned, the guys that ran the company, Mehdi Ali and obviously Irving Gould as well. They're figures that we kind of hear a bit about, but there's not really that much information out there about them. I mean, talking about Irving, for example, I know in your book you talk about this story when you discovered how he made his millions. That was a really interesting tale.
Yeah, I had a very good relationship with Irving. Irving Gould was the chairman, and he was the major shareholder of Commodore. He owned 22% of the shares. He was a very interesting man because a very wealthy man. He was a resident of Canada, and I think a semi-resident of the US, plus he had a base in the Bahamas where he kept his fishing boat. And he could not stay in any one country longer than 3 days, otherwise they would have hit him with tax. So he was moving around all the time. Anyway, I got on really well with him. And one day I said, look, I know this is very impertinent of me to ask you. I said, but would you mind telling me how you made all your money? He said, yeah, I don't mind telling you. He said, quote, word for word, he said, I took the best piss of my life. What are you talking about? He said, David, he said, I was in the Four Seasons restaurant in Manhattan having lunch with some colleagues. And in those days, the Four Seasons was the trendy place to be. He said, I needed to go to the toilet. He said, so I walked to the gents. I walked in and I stood at the toilet. And I just got there and a guy came in and the guy's going, fucking idiots, I can't fucking believe, excuse my language, but it's the true story. He said, I can't believe these idiots said, blah, blah, blah. He was moaning and moaning and moaning. And Irving said to him, wow, you sound upset. Oh, the guy said, I am. I just can't believe it. So he said, what's the problem? Well, he said, I've just brought to my company an opportunity, brought it to their table. That is an amazing opportunity, and they've just turned it down. So Irving said, what is this opportunity? And this guy said, well, he said, you know how people move goods all around the world, and they use ships to move goods? And he said, if you imagine that you've got to move, you've got to move 100 weights of grain, you've got to move barrels of oil, you've got to move electronics, he said, and when they get loaded into a ship, they get all messed up, and it's awful. He said, well, these guys have come up with a new system. They've got 20-foot and 40-foot containers that you can isolate everything. They've got trucks that are designed to carry, and they've got ships that will carry the containers all around the world. He said, and I've just brought to the table the rights to this container system for the US. And he said, no, my guys have just turned it down. And Irving said, you just found the right man, and I'll make sure that you're a part of it. So that's how he made his millions. Interesting story.
Well, I mean, the management of Commodore often get blamed by the employees for the downfall of the company, and I mean, they did make a lot of missteps. I remember, in, I think it was early 1992, the Amiga 500, every kid at school had one. Then all of a sudden it got discontinued, and this new machine that didn't seem any better came along, the Amiga 600. That was a screw-up.
This is the personal hate of mine, because again, I've always been an ideas person, but I've always been able to support ideas with rationale that makes sense. So in the UK, again, using bundles, we had managed to keep the Commodore 64 alive, certainly 2 years beyond its real sell-by date, by putting really good bundles together, and we just kept selling and selling. Anyway, we went through a Christmas, and I knew that would definitely be the very last ever Commodore 64 sale. No more. So I went to Medial and said, right, Medi, I want to maintain my relationship, Commodore's relationship, with this socio-economic group who have been spending £200 on something. I want to keep them. So what I want us to do is let us produce a very low-cost, cost-reduced Amiga with very basic facilities that you could add to as you could afford it. And I said, we should try to keep the £200 price point, but I think we'd get away with £249 as a price point. But the main thing is that the people, when they buy it, they need to know that they can upgrade and make it the same as the more expensive ones. So let's bring out, and it was agreed that we would call this the A300. So the next thing I know, I had sent to me, I think it was 20,000 units of A600. Now, immediately, when you see the name A600, your immediate thought is it is an improvement on the A500, because it's not a lesser number, it's a higher number. The reality was, it was no better. In fact, in some ways it was worse, but it cost more to make than the 500 did. So immediately we killed the Amiga 500, stone dead. People who bought the 600 were pretty well disappointed because it didn't deliver. So we screwed up 2 complete markets. But the annoying thing for me is that all the first Amiga 600s that we got all had Amiga 300 on the motherboard, because this is what they should have been. So talk about a big screw-up. I mean, you can't imagine a worse screw-up. The rationale for an Amiga 300 and why we should have it and how we can sell it to the right socioeconomic group, you can't argue. The rationale was perfect, but they screwed it up big time.
I mean, Commodore's international HQ was in Westchester in the States. And I was reading, your tale in the book about how you visited them over there, and you'd think, the Amiga was their golden egg. Surely they should have put all their resources into that, but they had more PC engineers. Do you even need engineers to work on a PC, I'd ask?
Yeah, well, I went to America as vice president of Commodore Inc. in January of 1992. And the first thing I did was to go and see the engineers, because I'm a huge believer. Without the technology, without the engineers, we don't have a business. And I've always had a good relationship with them. So I went to see our engineers in Westchester, because I was based in Westchester. And I discovered we had 7 Amiga engineers in total, 7. But at that moment in time, we had 40 PC engineers. Now, who in God's name in 1992 would design your own PCs, would make your own PCs when they're coming out of the Far East in massive numbers, really cheap, when everybody else was just putting their name and their badge on them? We got 40 PC engineers on our payroll. And I decided, let me find out why. Well, we had a brand new head of engineering, and his name was Bill Sidness. And he had been recruited by Commodore, by Mehdi Ali, from IBM. And his claim to fame in IBM was that he was responsible for the IBM PC Junior, which is considered to be the biggest catastrophe in computing history. And we recruited him. So what did he do? The first thing he did when he came to Commodore, he gave 40 jobs to his mates. They all came from IBM. And we had no need for them at all.
Well, you became the joint managing director of Commodore UK with Colin Proudfoot. How did you get that position?
Well, I'd actually been offered the position of MD long before that. Within about 2 or 3 weeks of me going to Commodore Electronics Limited as general manager, I was offered to take that role over back in the UK. But I turned it down, and the reason I turned it down is that I'm sure you know that there are 2 types of salespeople. There are what you call hunters and there are farmers. I'm a hunter. I love hunting and finding new business. And I'd built the UK business, and it was profitable and growing. So that role needed a farmer, not a hunter. I'd just been given 35 countries to be let loose on, and I was in my element, so I turned it down, which was a surprise to Mehdi Ali, I have to be honest with you. But I was so happy at doing what I was doing. Anyway, ultimately, Commodore, a couple of years later, Commodore got in very serious trouble, and I was forced back to the UK as MD because they needed the turnover that Commodore UK was giving them. And they knew I'd built the business, and so anyway, he said, I want you to be MD. And I said, well, listen, Mehdi, I said, what you need from me, my expertise is sales and marketing. Even, yes, I can read a balance sheet and all that stuff, but finance is not my forte. So I said, we've got a financial controller, it was Colin Proudfoot. I said, let's make him joint MD with me so I can concentrate on getting the turnover and the money coming in, and Colin can make sure that we pay what we have to pay. And I didn't know Colin, I knew of him, but I didn't know him. But it turned out to be a phenomenal partnership. We were just really great together. But that's how I ended up becoming joint MD.
And then we had the Amiga 1200 came along, and the CD32, which was the Amiga console. And I do remember that was it was popular in the UK, and I think it was the only market where it really had a real good presence. And I think it was actually the dominant CD platform during the time that it was on sale, those short 6 months. How did you approach marketing and launching the CD32 then into the market in the UK?
Well, there again, you see, I was very, very angry because, in my opinion, at that time, the CD32 was the first and only product in the 12 years I was with Commodore where they had planned it to be launched properly. And the reason I say that is because I'd built a tremendous relationship with all the software publishers, and there are many of them here today that you ask any of them, we had a fabulous relationship. We had planned to launch the CD32 in the spring, summer of the following year. And so what we'd done, I had got development kits in every major software publisher's house, and they were writing software specifically to utilize all of the features and benefits that the CD32 had, so that when we launched, we'd have software written for it that would really show its worth. But one day, Mehdi Ali comes to me and he says, I want to launch the CD32 in October. I said, are you crazy? No, he said, well, I want the extra sales. I said, Mehdi, you're not going to get extra sales. All you're going to do, I said, remember the 600, how it killed the 500? All you're going to do is you're going to kill all the 1200 sales. We had orders for every 1200 we could manufacture, in with all the big retailers. They'd all got their orders in for Christmas. I said, when the CD32 gets launched, not only will it be a nightmare because people will cancel their 1200 orders, we haven't got the software for it. The software's not ready. All that will come out is ports from the 1200, and that will be very negative. Anyway, he absolutely insisted he would not listen. So I have to do what I'm told to do. I had a great team of people. I've said before today that my team, we're only 7 people, but a fabulous team. And Dawn Levac was my marketing manager. She managed to get us the Science Museum in London to do the launch, which was absolutely perfect. We managed to get, what was his name?
Chris Evans?
Chris Evans, yeah. Chris Evans, who at that time was a rising TV and radio star, but he wasn't so big that it cost us $500,000 to get him. But we got him to, he hosted the launch with me. But what happened, which is really intriguing, is that I said to him, sometimes there is a God. Because about 3 weeks before our launch, which was September the 16th, there was an interview held by PC Week, I think it was, with Tom Kalinske, who was the worldwide president of Sega. And they interviewed him, all in print, and they said to him, okay, Mr. Sega, what about 32-bit CD-based consoles? And he said, quote for quote, can't be done. If anybody could do it, it would be Sega. We're not doing it, it can't be done. Thank you, God. Because it was in print, and we were. So what we did was, we had a voiceover done. You know, the booming voice where he was speaking about, you know, not being able to be done, la-di-la-di-la. And then, of course, we revealed the smoke and the mirrors, and there it was. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be in your shops in 3 weeks' time, which is phenomenal, right? But also, within a few days of that, a guy rang me up, and he said, David, he said, you don't remember me, he said, but I've dealt with you before. He said, I remember you. He said, I just like the way you are. He said, we sell poster sites all over the UK. And he said, you know, because you bought poster sites from us before, the deal is that you book a site from us, you pay 50%, and then you pay the balance, you know, when the posters go up. He said, I've got 3 absolutely top-placed poster sites, 96 sheet, the big ones, in the 3 best places in London, that somebody has already paid half the money on, and have just told me that they're not going to go ahead with it. So I'd like to offer them to you for the 50% that's owing. Oh, and by the way, one of them is right outside Sega's head office. So, taking that, and in line with the fact that Sega had said they couldn't do it, I don't know if you remember Sega's advertising slogan. It used to be this good takes ages. To be this good, and they spin the word ages around, takes Sega. So we put a big poster upside there, right outside that I said, to be this good will take Sega ages. And that went down like a lead balloon with Sega, but it was fantastic. And even though we didn't have the internet, that went viral. It was incredible. So yeah, I think we had some balls.
Well, talking about Mehdi Ali as well, I mean, I was reading Dave Haney's chapter in the book, and he kind of attributes a lot of the downfall to Mehdi. I mean, what was your relationship like with him? Was he a difficult man to work with?
Yeah, he was a prick. He was like an Indian version of Danny DeVito, very short guy, but with a massive attitude that thought he knew everything, but actually knew very little. Having said that, he used to give me a real hard time, and yet somehow or other, I really can't ever get my head around this. He must have had a certain level of regard for me, because I was in his office one day in Manhattan, and he said, right, he said, you're coming home with me tonight. He said, you're going to stay at my place, and we're having dinner with my family, which was completely out of the blue, completely uncharacteristic with him. And I don't know anybody else who's ever invited. I've got no idea at all. So he showed a side of him which I'd never seen before. But he was such an arrogant guy. I mean, when you got people with proven success trying to tell you, look, this is really a good idea, let's at least try something, and he just refused and refused and refused. If he'd have refused because he'd done some research that proved my idea was wrong, no problem. But when they don't do any research and they just dismiss it out of hand, so it's a very strange situation. I mean, I definitely hold him responsible. The missed opportunities were phenomenal, and the screw-ups were incredible, and it's all down to him, and all down to his lack of judgment, and that extended immensely to hiring people. His hiring of people was awful. And again, I told you about Bill Sidness, who was the head of engineering. Around the same time, Medi hired a head of manufacturing. I don't even remember this guy's name, to be honest with you. But this head of manufacturing, he said, right, we've got a factory in Hong Kong, we've got a factory in Singapore, get rid of them. We're going to build a place in the Philippines, and that's where we're going to build the CD32. Now, my first question to myself and everybody else was, Commodore has no business in Asia. We're not selling anything, not one product into Asia. So why in God's name would you set up a factory in the Philippines, which is 5 weeks by sea from your core market, the Europe market, when things in the technology industry that can change in a week, never mind 5 weeks, why would you do it? It didn't make any sense. It turns out that the reason why he made this recommendation was that the company that we had recruited him from, when he worked for them, they had a plant in the Philippines, and he had a mistress there. And he wanted us to open up a factory so he could visit his mistress. It's true, I promise you it's true.
I know after Commodore, you took some time out of the industry, and then I remember we first met, I think it was in Amiga Norway, about 5 years ago we met, the 30th anniversary party it was, in Amsterdam, yeah. And did it surprise you coming back and seeing all this affection and this love that people still have for Commodore and the Amiga, and continue to today?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, because of what happened with us trying, I mean, we proved to the world that we were the best part of the whole Commodore organization to run the business. And Colin and I decided that we'd try to raise enough money to do a management buyout of the assets, because we really believed in the product, and we believed that we had a good plan. So we pulled together a business plan, which in 1994-5, we raised $50 million. You try to do that today, it's impossible. But the reason that we did was because we had got a very good business plan. Anyway, the bottom line is that, and I'm not going to go into details, if you want to read the book, we got cheated out of it. And so after all of that, I was very bruised and battered, and I just wanted to get out. I was completely shell-shocked, and I just wanted a complete change of life. So, and I really changed my life. I remarried. I married a girl from the Dominican Republic. I lived over there for a while. Then I went to Australia, and I bought a restaurant for 5 years, and done all sorts of different things. And the whole Commodore thing was completely out of my system. Then one day I got this email, and it was from 3 guys who are actually here today, funnily enough. It was from Marcel Frankenay, Marvin Drugsma, and René Van der Steen, sorry. And they said, would I be a guest speaker at this Amiga 30 event in Amsterdam? And I said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And they said, how much would you charge? And I said, well, I won't charge anything, but I don't think it should cost me anything. So if you want to pay my airfare, a budget airline and a cheap hotel, I'll be happy to do it. So I got on stage. I don't even remember what I said because I was completely out of the market for so long. But that was amazing because not only did it bring me back into the retro scene and the massive Commodore Amiga family that there is around the world, but whilst I was there, I met the guys from Friend who are here today, and they asked me to join their company because what they're developing is changing history in the same way that the Amiga did. So it's really almost meant to be.
Well, the book is called Commodore, The Inside Story. There's a Blu-ray as well that we filmed together with some stories you've never heard before, some really interesting stuff on there. And also you re-released your music CD that you made dedicated to the Amiga, didn't you?
Yeah. I got to promote it. Come on, guys. This is what I'm here for.
That's about how many pages? It's a decent book.
Yeah, 368 pages, 90,000 words, or thereabouts. Yeah, that CD, it's a funny thing, is because at the time when Commodore was really in trouble, I started to diversify. And my background is that before I ever got into sales and marketing, I was a musician. I was a professional flamenco guitarist. And I've always had a big love for music. So when Commodore started getting into trouble, I invested in a recording studio very close to where Commodore was in the UK. And the first project that I did, I wanted to celebrate the Amiga, the 10th anniversary of Amiga. So I released this CD called Everybody's Girlfriend, because as you know, Amiga is female friend in Spanish. So this CD is called Everybody's Girlfriend. And the only thing we knew about our target audience was that they either owned an Amiga or wanted to buy one. We didn't know anything about their, how old they were, what musical tastes they had. So we decided to put a whole range of different genres of music on there. And there's no computer-generated music. I hate to say this. I don't like computer-generated music. I just don't. I like live music. Both my sons who are here today, they're musicians, and when you're into live music, I'm sorry, the SID chip doesn't cut it as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so we produced this album. The sad thing was that Commodore's demise was quicker than we thought. So by the time we launched it, it was just around the time Commodore had gone, and we did okay with it. We sold everything that we had printed, but we didn't do as well as we thought. But the interesting thing is that since this resurgence of Commodore's and interest, I was forced to re-release it, so we re-released it, and it's available now. We've now got it as a download as well because it's easier to download, and people prefer the download. I haven't bought any copies of the CD with me because I've only got a couple left, to be honest with you. But it's good if you like, if you like all sorts of genre music. And I have to be honest, I actually composed and play one track on the album, which is called, of course, Para Mi Amiga, which means for my Amiga, and I dedicated that to Jay Miner, who was the original mastermind behind the design of the Amiga, and sadly he died quite a while ago. So that's on there. But yeah, it's an interesting. If you like music, it's varied enough. I think there's something for everybody.
Well, the book is available this weekend. You're going to be selling copies here?
Yes, I've got it here.
Yeah, and the Blu-ray as well, and you can get electronic versions on your website, downtimepublishing.com. Yep. We do have a few minutes, I think, if there's any questions.
Any questions, yeah. If there's any questions on the stage?
Any questions about Commodore, the Amiga?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, a very good question actually. Poland was actually my country, one of my 35 countries when I was at CEL, but we weren't supposed to sell because of the political or whatever situation. We were not supposed to sell to. But Germany used to sell through the back door. The German Commodore subsidiary, they'd sell to anybody. They were whores, to be honest with you. And it was okay into Poland because I didn't have a business there because I wasn't supposed officially to sell. But they also sold into places like Turkey, where I had a very good market. And you imagine if my distributor in Turkey only had one, if you imagine that they bought from me at a very rock bottom price, but they had to warrant it, they had to market it, they had to sell it, and all of that. If you imagine suddenly there's several thousand illegal Amigas coming in, and those dealers are selling it. When something goes wrong, they'll be coming back to my distributor who hadn't sold them for him to fix them. So, which is really outrageous. You can't have that. So what I did actually, just as a matter of interest, I took a team of 4 people, and we went to Istanbul, and we went through every one of their computers that they had in stock. We made a note of all the serial numbers, and he said, right, anything that comes in that isn't these serial numbers, you don't have to warrant them, send them back to them. But yeah, in answer to the question, yeah, Poland did get Amigas, but they were through the back door.
Questions?
Andrew Hewson here. This is a personal question, David. Obviously, I remember the Commodore 64 products, the computers. One thing that always struck me was the business was called Commodore Business Machines. And we never thought of it as a business machine. We always thought of it as a games machine, all the Commodore products. And it's a personal question for you. Did you believe that you were working for a business machine company or a games machine company?
Well, you've got to remember that Commodore's background, when Jack Tramiel set them up, everything he sold was business orientated. He started with calculators, and then he got into that self-assembly, the Kim 1, and the PETs, of course, and PETs were business machines. So that's why they were registered as CBM. And to be honest with you, at one time, that name, CBM, was as powerful as IBM. And at one time, we were $1 billion company. But I think what happened is that he was a very smart man, and he decided to produce a low-cost home computer. But you can't change the name because they were already registered as Commodore Business Machines. And I think there is some benefit to having a name like Commodore Business Machines, even though the products are meant as games. Because let's be honest about it, the trick in marketing is you've got to convince the parent that what they are buying is in the interests of their child. So if we just try to sell a games machine, and let's say we skip forward to the Amiga, we're talking about a £400 product. It is much easier to justify that purchase, but with a product that has some business orientation. That's why we always put productivity software inside the packs. Even with the 64, we did that too. So no, it didn't bother me, but there's no reason why we couldn't have become had a games division with its own name. But as I was saying earlier on, in my honest opinion, from the day I joined Commodore, they never had a business plan of any kind. So they stumbled from one crisis to the next.
I'll say a few words.
Excuse me a second, Andrew. I've got to give you a hug in a minute, mate, because it's a long time since we've seen each other. I'm really pleased to.
I want to say a few more words about professional things at Commodore. Please remember that the Amiga also had the professional line, which were desktop and tower machines. And the Amiga line was divided in 2 lines, right? The home machines like the 500, 600, 1200, and the professional machines like 2000, 3000, 4000, and its tower variants. So it was like that. But the Amiga is mostly recognized, the Commodore is mostly recognized for home machines, obviously, because they were most popular, right? Okay, one more question maybe from that side, and we have to finish.
Hello. What was the hardware failure rate of Commodore computers?
The hardware failure rate, what was it of their computers? How many broke?
Oh, probably none. Do you know, that's a very good question. I wouldn't have the faintest idea. What I do know that I think you'll find interesting is that we had a guy in Hong Kong named David Spires, and he was our procurement manager, and it was his job to bet all the components that we used. And one day he changed our supplier of Commodore 64 power supplies, for which I think by doing so he saved something like 10 cents a unit. And we were selling, millions. So it was, but the problem was that we shipped those power supplies out, hundreds of thousands of Commodore 64s, and every time they got plugged in, they blew the chips on the bloody 64. It cost Commodore an absolute fortune to save 10 cents a piece. But I don't know the failure rate. I honestly don't. It's a very good question. But I guess it's something that's very difficult to answer because every subsidiary looked after its own products. But I mean, I don't think the failure rate was. It would have been exaggerated. If you remember when the 64 was launched, we sold 64 through every outlet we could, including news agents and mail order, and people were sending stuff back saying it doesn't work because unlike a CD player or a television, you push a button and it works. With a computer, you've got to put something into it to get something out. So lots of stuff was returned to us. There was nothing wrong with that. People just didn't know how to use it. So that was quite an interesting time. A very good question. I don't know the answer, and I don't think you'd ever get the answer.
Michael, there are lots more stories, of course, in the book, Commodore, The Inside Story. You can get your copy this weekend. Just a little taste of there's so many stories in the book that, if you're a fan of Commodore and the Amiga, it's absolutely worth a buy. But please give a big thank you to David Pleasance.